Hello, everyone. It is the 16th of March, Saturday. It's a little past noon. Had to work again this morning, but I'm getting started now. It is cooler out, but warm enough for shorts, I think. Sun's out, a little bit breezy, but not bad. I'm going to pick up right where I left off yesterday, which was the upper ball joint on the passenger side. So all I have to do is remove the old one, which is ready to come out. Basically, I cleaned off everything around it. And the upper ball joints are specific to side of the vehicle. So there's a specific one for the right side, which is this one, at least according to the label, and one for the other side. The lower ball joints are reversible, so they can go on either side. I wanted to also share that I, I took out my steering wheel yesterday. One of the horn buttons doesn't work, so I looked at the steering wheel that was on the steering column that Brian gave me as part of my Kentucky trip last year, and looking at them, at least one of them, maybe both of them, actually looks better as far as the finish goes than the ones I have. Even though the steering wheel itself is not usable, it's in pretty bad shape. So I'm going to clean that up, test the switches out, and I'll just pick the best two that I have to put back on the horn, put back on the steering wheel before I put that back in the car. I did order the that bearing sleeve that I need for the upper bearing. So once that comes in next week sometime, I can put that back together, put the steering wheel back together. I'm going to try and clean it up as best I can too, get some of the crud that's on it off. But primarily today, I'll just be doing the ball joints. I sent an email through eBay to PST Technologies, I think they're called. They're out of Boonton, New Jersey, asking where my front end kit is, my tie rods and center link and all that, because I have no shipment notification on eBay, which is disappointing. And of course, they're closed on the weekends, but you got to wait 4 days before you contact them. Today's the fourth day, so maybe I'll get a response on Monday about that. So that's a little disappointing because I was really hoping I might have a chance to put all this back together this weekend, but obviously that's not going to happen now unless by some miracle they get delivered today. Not expecting that to happen. So anyway, so it's primarily ball joints today. And ready to remove the lower nut here. I just got the cotter key removed, cleaned all the grease off as best I could. I have a socket that fits. There we go. I had a socket that fits. Here it is. It is a 7/8 socket. Now I can't get the impact gun in there. There's not enough room, so I'm going to just use a 1/2 inch ratchet and or breaker bar if I need it to break that loose. And then I'll need the tuning fork again to separate right at here. So I'll be banging on that with my big hammer to get that separated. And then we'll be well on our way. And then these are 9/16 nut and bolts on the top here. That'll be the last part. Took a lot of hammering, but finally got it loose. So next will come the bolts, and I'll see what kind of shape that ball joint is in, and then I'll be able to check the upper control arm bushings too. All right, as far as I can tell, the upper control arm bushings are fine. They don't bind, they don't make any noise, and I cannot budge them moving right or left at all, so I think that's a good sign. So it's just a matter of prying this ball joint out and putting the new one in, and then installing it back on the spindle. So the upper ball joint appeared to be fine. I see just a little bit of damage there, but I think that's when I used the separator tool to get it apart, so I don't think that was there before. So it's tight. But then again, like I said before, I don't mind replacing all these parts at the same time because even though it may feel tight by hand, that doesn't mean necessarily it's tight on the car too, with all that extra stress and weight and everything. I'd forgotten how these things were kept in place, how there's a little spacer in here that goes in between there, and how the third bolt, which I forgot was there because it was covered with goop and stuff, it's actually got a threaded fitting. In fact, the old mounting bolts are quite a bit longer than the new ones. So the new ones, they'll just go in my junk drawer, for whatever. They're not going to work on my application. But luckily, my original bolts are in great condition. They're not bad at all. So I'll be able to just reuse those without a problem. So I need to go clean these up a little bit, and then I'll come back, clean that up a little bit more, and well, it looks like I have great access to the lower ball joint right now too. Looks like I'm going to have to remove that caliper, or at least move it a little bit, because the brake line bracket looks like it's right up against the bolt there, so that might not be quite in the right position. It probably shouldn't be that close anyway, but I'll work on that in a minute. I'll focus on the upper right now, get that all cleaned up and ready for the new one to go in. The ball joint is a very tight fit with that spacer under here, and then the ball joint filling in the gap up here on top. So I had to use a small hammer to gently tap it in place until I could get the studs to fall in under here, or the bolts to go in under here. And then there's a third one that was hidden before that goes in the back. It should line up perfectly now because the other two are already in place. So now it's just a matter of tightening those down, and the upper ball joint will be in place until I got to connect it to the spindle. I think I'm going to leave the spindle unhooked until I get the lower one out too. But this one's almost done, as you can see. All right, I loosened up the caliper. I just took out the top bolt just enough to move that junction out of the way from the brakes, and then I was able to get the nut off with my impact gun and a U-joint because I couldn't get it straight on there. And I just finished banging the crap out of that to finally break that loose. I did notice the lower ball joint seems pretty loose. I'll find out for sure when I actually take it off the lower control arm, but that doesn't surprise me. I already know the one on the other side is bad. So that and the center link, I guess, were the worst of it as far as the front end goes. I'm very grateful that these lower ball joints are not riveted on. I think the first time I ever replaced lower ball joints on one of these Lincolns, they were riveted on from the factory. Talk about a pain in the butt to get off. But these are bolted on, so these may have been replaced in the past. They probably have been. But they're going to get replaced again. I don't remember seeing a tag either, but I guess I'll preserve the tag, clean it up, put it back on. All right, there's the lower ball joint out. It seemed pretty tight too, but again, I don't think you can really judge it that well unless it's mounted on something you can really move it. So, but just sitting here like this, it seems tight. But the new one has bolts that are long enough on this one, so I'll use the new bolts to mount this one in place. There's only two of them, so I'm ready to install this. I scraped around the opening here where it goes to get rid of as much dirt and grease as I could. So I'll get that on right now. All right, I have the new lower ball joint in place. And I was interrupted by a phone call again. Anyway, the lower ball joint is bolted in place. These nuts aren't that big, so they don't need to be that tight. So they're snugged up good. They're good and tight, but they don't need to be overly tight. So the next thing I'm going to do is lift up the spindle over on top here and set it in place. And then tighten that down, put the cotter keys in, and that'll conclude the ball joints on this side. Now the spindle is in place on the new lower ball joint, the upper ball joint, and I'm going to tighten down these nuts just with a ratchet handle, then a breaker bar. I'm not going to use my impact gun. I know that there's torque settings for all this, but I've never worried too much about that because you usually end up having to wrench those things so much tighter in order for the holes to line up to put the cotter key in. So I'll tighten it plenty good and tight. One thing I noticed right off the bat, now that I have that tight, or almost tight, I tried moving it, and let me tell you, it is stiff. And that's actually a good thing. Well, that tells me, because that other one, the lower ball joint that was on there before, I was easily able to rotate it back and forth. So that tells me right there that this new one is nice and tight, like it should be. So that makes me feel a whole lot better. So I changed my mind. Just because I haven't done it this way in the past doesn't mean I shouldn't start doing it the right way now. So I looked up the torque specification. For that spindle nut, it's 70 to 90 foot-pounds. So I set it to 70. I figure I'll start at the lower end and see where my hole ends up. So I set it to 70, put it on here. You probably can't hear it clicking, but it is clicking, so it's good right there. And my hole is close enough to lining up so I can put my cotter key in there, cotter pin. So I'm going to go with that. So I'll do the same thing up here. What's interesting about the top one is I believe it's the same spec, but somebody in my shop manual did a pin and ink change, who knows how many years ago or why. It was originally 70 to 90. They changed it to 25 to 35. Upper arm, inner shaft, oh, that's a different, that's not the right one anyway. Where is that one? Upper ball joint to control arm. I don't think that's it. Anyway, I'll figure out which one it is and set it accordingly. So here's the procedure I used. I started with the lower range of the torque so that if I hit that, but I needed more to tighten it more in order for the hole to line up for the cotter key. I set it to the next, 10 pounds up and maybe even 20 pounds up toward the top end of the range until I move that nut enough to line it up. That way I know I'm within the range I'm supposed to be torque-wise. Plus I have room now to put my cotter key in. Okay, I finished greasing the upper and lower ball joints. They're fully installed. Cotter keys are in place. Everything's locked in place, torqued down, etc. And now I can actually move it a lot easier, but it's still nice and tight. I like it. Looks good. So that concludes the passenger side. I'm going to do the same thing on the driver's side, although I may run out of energy. This took quite a bit of effort, but should go faster. I'm not going to film it unless something unusual happens on the other side. All right, I'm going to wrap this up for the day. I was successful. I got the ball joints replaced, all four of them, upper, lower, both sides. But I tell you, that job always kicks my butt. It's so much work. Spent most of my day on my knees, but I survived. I'm greasy from head to toe. I'll definitely be using the fast irons tonight to get all cleaned up. Um, One thing that really annoyed me that I got to share with you when I was looking underneath the car, I was actually looking at the transmission to see if I could see where it was leaking. Then I noticed there's a water leak under there. And that really annoyed me because of where it was coming from. It's coming from a freeze plug. I don't know if you recall, but when I had the engine out, the block mounted on an engine stand, I replaced all the freeze plugs. So I figured this is a great time to do that. I even put sealer around the edges of them at someone's suggestion. Some black sealer that one of the mechanics at the shop suggested I do that. So I did all that, but one's leaking anyway. It's the one on the driver's side in the back. Um, I think I might be able to access it and actually get to it and replace it again or something, do something about it. I might have to take the exhaust pipe out to do that to get enough clearance. I'm not sure. I'm not going to worry about it too much right now. I mean, it's not like it's pouring out of there, but you can definitely see it's been seeping. And I just like, man, I'm just shaking my head. These things are made in China. I don't want to sound prejudiced, but these Asian products don't always, they're not always exactly the right size. So I wonder if Dorman, that's the maker of these freeze plugs, if they're just not quite right. On the other hand, none of the other five freeze plugs are leaking. It's just the one. So anyway, that's just an annoyance at this point. I'm not going to let it do anything more than annoy me at this point. So, so let me show you what the front end looks like now. And I did grease everything too, top and bottom. So nice new ball joint there, and I don't know how well you can see it there, but that's that tag. Oh, there it is. Yeah, same on both sides. So got that done. Now I just have to wait for the rest of the front end components to show up. And I don't remember if I mentioned it earlier or not, but I also ordered a new set of shocks. I figured I might as well do it all. Oh, I also wanted to say that the lower ball joint on this side was the only one out of all four that was definitely loose. I was actually able to move that one even outside the car. And that's the one I suspected was loose. Like, it was clunking and all kinds of stuff. So even though it was just one that apparently was really bad, I'm glad I replaced them all anyway. So I think that'll pay dividends in the long run. So with that, I will bid you adieu. Thank you.